June 17, 2015, a humid Wednesday evening in Charleston, South Carolina. The Emmanuel African Methodist Episcopal Church stood quietly under the fading sunset. A white structure, tall and historic, known as a symbol of faith, resilience, and hope for the Black community. For nearly 2 centuries, they were young. They had futures, dreams, and laughter in their eyes. But somewhere along the way, that light turned into something far darker. Innocence can vanish in an instant, replaced by hatred, envy, or a twisted sense of power. Tonight, we dive deep into the stories of 10 teenagers who went from innocent to evil. Each of these crimes isn't just shocking. They're haunting reminders of how thin the line can be between good and evil. Let's begin. It was a warm July night in 2012, the kind that smells like freedom when you're 16. Skylar Neese quietly slid her bedroom window open, careful not to wake her parents. She'd done this before, sneaking out to meet her best friends, Sheila Eddy and Rachel Schoaf. They'd been inseparable for years. 3 girls who shared secrets, sleepovers, and endless laughter. To anyone looking in from the outside, they were the definition of teenage friendship. But behind the smiles, something darker was brewing. A storm Skylar never saw coming. They drove down dark country roads, the kind where silence starts to feel heavy. Skylar sat in the backseat, scrolling through her phone, laughing at something small. But the girls in the front weren't laughing. They had knives hidden beneath their clothes, and a plan they'd been talking about for weeks. They didn't want to be her friend anymore. They wanted her gone. They parked near a secluded patch of woods, somewhere quiet, somewhere no one would hear. Skylar got out of the car first, stretching her arms. Still unaware of what was about to happen, she turned to say something. Maybe a joke, maybe a question. But before she could finish, Sheila whispered, "Now." The sound of the first knife slicing through the air broke the night open. Skylar screamed, fighting for her life, begging them to stop. But they didn't. They stabbed her over 50 times. Her last words, according to one of the killers, were a faint whisper of disbelief. Why? When it was over, they dragged her body into the trees, covering it with dirt and branches. Then, as if nothing had happened, they cleaned themselves up and went home. The next morning, Skylar's parents thought she had gone to work. They waited by the phone, expecting a call that would never come. For months, her disappearance remained a mystery. Posters went up. News channels covered it. Her parents searched every highway, every corner of West Virginia. But Sheila and Rachel, they kept the secret. They tweeted about how much they missed her. They laughed with classmates. They even comforted her parents, all while knowing exactly where her body lay. It took 6 months before the truth began to unravel. The guilt became too heavy for Rachel. She finally broke down and confessed. She led police to the remote spot where Skylar's remains were buried. When investigators found her, all that was left was a skeleton, bones hidden under leaves and mud, silence wrapped around tragedy. In court, the girls showed no emotion. Sheila smirked during her hearing, as if it were all some cruel game. The reason they gave for killing their best friend was chillingly simple. We just didn't like her anymore. A friendship that once promised forever ended with a knife in the dark. He was 16, full of life, and finally starting to taste independence. Jason Sweeney had just earned his very first paycheck from his construction job, $500. It wasn't much, but to him, it meant everything. It was pride. It was freedom. He told his friends about it, excited, trusting, unaware that those same friends were about to turn his happiness into horror. It was a warm afternoon in May 2003, in the quiet neighborhood of Fishtown, Pennsylvania. Jason's friends, Dominic and Nicholas, both 16, along with two teenage girls, Justina and Holly, had come up with a plan. They would lure Jason out to a secluded spot by pretending they wanted to hang out, maybe smoke, maybe talk. But in truth, they wanted his money. They wanted to rob him. They wanted to see what it felt like to take control, to play God for a few brutal minutes. Jason walked with them, laughing, casual, unsuspecting. These were people he'd known for years, his best friends, the ones who knew every detail of his life. When they reached the woods, Dominic handed Jason a beer. He took a sip. The next second, something cracked. The first blow came fast, a hammer to the back of his head. He stumbled forward, confused, bleeding. He didn't even get the chance to run. The others joined in. They swung a hatchet, a rock, their fists. They didn't stop. The sound of impact echoed through the trees, dull and final. Jason's body crumpled to the ground, but the beating continued long after his last breath. When it was done, they dragged him to a shallow grave and buried him beneath leaves and dirt. His blood soaked the earth, while his killers laughed, counted the cash in his wallet, and walked away like nothing happened. Hours later, they were seen hanging out at a diner, eating fries, acting normal. Kids who had just committed an unthinkable act, blending back into the world like shadows. The next day, Jason's father went to pick him up from work. When he wasn't there, panic set in. Calls went unanswered. Days passed. The police searched everywhere until a tip led them to the woods. That's where they found him. His skull shattered, his body unrecognizable. The autopsy revealed the brutality. More than 20 blows to the head, ribs broken, every bone screaming the story of betrayal. When the killers were caught, their confessions were cold, emotionless. They admitted they'd planned everything, that the girls had set Jason up with flirtation and fake affection, leading him into the trap. One of them even smiled while describing it. In the courtroom, Jason's father sat trembling, eyes fixed on the faces of the teenagers who had taken his son's life. They weren't monsters from a nightmare. They were kids from his neighborhood. Teenagers who'd eaten at his table, laughed with his son. It pretended to be family. It wasn't about money anymore. It was about something darker, greed mixed with cruelty, the thrill of domination. Jason's dreams, his laughter, his innocence, all crushed beneath the weight of teenage malice masquerading as friendship. April 16, 2007. The morning began like any other on the campus of Virginia Tech University in Blacksburg, Virginia. The air was crisp, the sky pale blue, and the sidewalks buzzed with the rhythm of student life. Backpacks swinging, laughter echoing, conversations about exams and weekend plans. It was a Monday, and thousands of students were just beginning their day, unaware that history's deadliest school shooting in the United States was about to unfold around them. At 7:15 a.m., a few muffled sounds broke the morning calm inside a dormitory called West Ambler Johnston Hall. 2 students were found shot, one dead instantly, the other critically wounded. The police arrived quickly, suspecting a domestic dispute. The shooter was nowhere to be found. The university administration hesitated, uncertain whether the threat remained. The campus wasn't locked down. Classes continued. Students walked freely between buildings, unaware that the man responsible for the first attack was walking among them, armed and silent, planning something far worse. His name was Sung-Ho Cho, a 23-year-old English major, quiet and withdrawn. Professors had described him as a troubled soul, detached, expressionless, with writings filled with violence and pain. Some students remembered him for his silence, others said he never looked anyone in the eye. Behind that silence, though, Cho was nursing a darkness that no one truly saw coming. He had spent months buying weapons, ammunition, and preparing a plan that would shatter every illusion of safety on that campus. At 9:40 a.m., Cho entered Norris Hall, an academic building filled with students attending their morning classes. He chained the main doors shut from the inside, trapping everyone inside. Then, he began his massacre. Room by room, class by class, the first sound of gunfire echoed down the hallway, sharp and deafening. Students froze, confused at first, then terrified. Some hid under desks. Others tried to block doors with tables, chairs, even their bodies. But Cho was relentless. Inside one classroom, Professor Liviu Librescu, a Holocaust survivor, held the door shut while his students escaped through the windows. He was shot and killed, but his bravery saved countless lives. In another room, students texted loved ones their final messages. "I love you. There's a shooter. Tell mom and dad." The sound of gunfire was constant, echoing off the tile floors and walls. The screams, the chaos, the desperate prayers. They all blended into a symphony of terror. The university's alert system finally went out, warning everyone to stay inside. But for those trapped in Norris Hall, it was already too late. Police officers outside heard the shots, the cries for help, the frantic calls over 911. They moved in, unsure of what awaited them behind the locked doors. As they reached the building, they could hear the final bursts of gunfire, and then silence. When they breached the classrooms, Cho was dead. He had taken his own life with the same gun he used to end so many others. In just 11 minutes, 32 people were murdered and 17 were wounded. Professors, students, friends, lives erased in seconds. The youngest victim was 18, the oldest 76. Each one had a story, a dream, a life waiting to unfold. The aftermath was haunting. Hallways splattered with blood, bullet holes in the walls, abandoned notebooks, shattered phones, chairs overturned in desperation. Outside, the sound of sirens and helicopters filled the air, but inside those classrooms, the silence was unbearable. When the news broke, it spread like wildfire. Television screens across the world filled with the images of crying students, emergency responders, and parents rushing toward the campus, praying for a miracle. It was chaos and heartbreak broadcast live, a nation once again forced to confront the unthinkable. Reporters struggled to find words. Anchors choked on their sentences. How could this happen? Again. In the following days, the horror deepened as investigators pieced together Cho's motives. They discovered that before the attack, he had mailed a manifesto and videos to a news network. In the footage, he stared coldly into the camera, ranting about rich kids and deceitful charlatans. His words were filled with rage and delusion, a glimpse into a mind completely consumed by darkness. He referred to himself as a martyr, a man wronged by society, now striking back. But the world didn't see him as a martyr, only as a monster. For the survivors, those 11 minutes became a lifetime. Many couldn't return to the campus. Some couldn't step into a classroom again. Others lived with survivor's guilt, haunted by the faces of friends they couldn't save. Families received phone calls no parent should ever hear. The names of the victims were read one by one, each name followed by a silence that seemed to stretch forever. The university, wrapped in grief, became a symbol of mourning and resilience. Candlelight vigils stretched across the drill field. Thousands stood shoulder to shoulder, holding candles against the wind. The sound of sobbing mixed with the quiet hum of prayers. Across America, students at other universities looked around their classrooms differently after that day, wondering if their schools were truly safe, if anywhere was truly safe. Virginia Tech changed everything. It changed how schools approached safety, how law enforcement responded, how universities communicated during crises. But those changes came at an unimaginable cost. In 11 minutes, the illusion of safety on American campuses was gone forever. What remained was scars. On a campus, on a community, and on a country that would never again see education as a place untouched by violence. It was a chilly October evening in 2009, the kind of night when small-town Missouri feels wrapped in quiet. 15-year-old Alyssa Bustamante walked through the woods behind her house, her boots crunching over the dirt path. She knew better than anyone. She wasn't out there for fresh air. She wasn't running away. She was preparing. Days earlier, she had dug 2 shallow graves in that same patch of forest, just to see how it would feel to kill someone. No rage, no reason. Just curiosity, disguised as a teenage girl. Alyssa was the kind of girl people described as different. She was smart, artistic, with streaks of dark blue in her hair and a taste for heavy music. Teachers saw a bright student. Her friends saw a girl who liked to push boundaries. But behind the eyeliner and sarcastic humor was a mind slipping into darkness. Her diary told stories of depression, self-harm, and anger at the world. No one knew she'd already started fantasizing about murder. On October 21, 2009, 9-year-old Elizabeth Olten was walking home from a friend's house just down the road. It was barely a 5-minute walk. She called her mom, saying she'd be home soon. But she never made it. Alyssa had seen her that afternoon, small, innocent, full of life. And something inside Alyssa decided that Elizabeth would be the one. She coaxed her into the woods, using a friendly smile that hid a storm. The 2 girls disappeared among the trees as daylight began to fade. Somewhere between the laughter and the silence, Alyssa changed. She pulled out a knife, pressed it against the little girl's throat, and ended her life. She strangled her, stabbed her, and dragged her body into the grave she'd already prepared. The dirt fell quickly, covering what she'd done. Then she walked home, washed the blood from her hands, and went to a church dance that same night, smiling, laughing, blending back into the crowd as if nothing had happened. When Elizabeth didn't return home, panic spread through the small community. Volunteers searched through the woods, flashlights sweeping across the same ground where Alyssa had buried her body. Alyssa even joined in the search. She hugged Elizabeth's mother, pretending to help, hiding her secret under layers of fake concern. But her mask began to slip. Police grew suspicious when they noticed scratches on her arms. A few days later, they searched her bedroom, and what they found would haunt them forever. In her diary, dated the night of the murder, Alyssa had written, "I just killed someone. I strangled them and slit their throat and stabbed them. It was amazing. As soon as you get over the oh my God, I can't do this feeling, it's pretty enjoyable." Those words froze investigators in their tracks. She had documented the murder like an experiment, describing it with the cold precision of someone who felt nothing. When confronted, Alyssa led police to the grave. There, beneath the dirt, they found Elizabeth's small body, just a few hundred feet from Alyssa's own backyard. The town went silent. No one could understand how a 15-year-old girl, an honor student, a churchgoer, could commit something so monstrous. Prosecutors called it pure evil, and the nation agreed. Her face, pale and emotionless in court, became the haunting symbol of innocence turned into something unrecognizable. It was 2 days after Christmas in 1992, when 17-year-old Stuart Tay left his home in Orange County, California, thinking he was meeting friends to plan something thrilling. A pretend computer heist. A small-time scheme that felt exciting to a kid who dreamed of becoming a tech prodigy. Stuart was smart, disciplined, the son of hardworking parents who had immigrated to give him a better life. He was the kind of teenager people looked up to. Straight-A student, polite, ambitious. He had no idea that the friends he trusted were digging his grave before he even got there. They were honor students too. 5 boys from the same suburban world of good grades and high expectations. But behind their perfect report cards, something had begun to rot. They saw themselves as untouchable, as masterminds in their own story. To them, the plan wasn't just to hang out. It was to kill Stuart. It started as a twisted joke, then turned into a challenge, then became a reality. They convinced themselves that he was a threat, that he might expose their plans. So, they decided the only way to fix it was to erase him completely. That night, Stuart drove to a house in Buena Park, carrying a briefcase and the kind of nervous excitement only a teenager could feel when stepping into something dangerous but thrilling. He thought he was walking into a plan. He was walking into an ambush. Inside the dimly lit garage, the boys greeted him with fake smiles. Then, one of them swung a baseball bat. The sound of it hitting bone cracked through the air. Stuart fell to the floor, stunned, confused, begging them to stop. But the blows kept coming. They beat him over and over, bats, fists, kicks, until the life drained from his body. When it was over, they wrapped him in plastic, dragged him to a pre-dug grave in the backyard, and buried him under a layer of dirt and concrete. The same boys who'd studied calculus and volunteered at school events were now standing over a corpse they'd created. Their classmate, their friend. They washed their hands, cleaned the garage, and went back to their normal teenage lives, as if it were nothing more than a bad dream. But the truth doesn't stay buried forever. One of the killers couldn't keep quiet. He bragged about it. How smart they were. How they'd gotten away with murder. That arrogance cracked the case wide open. Within weeks, police arrived at the Buena Park house, and what they found beneath the ground was a body beaten beyond recognition. It was Stuart, the boy who had believed in friendship, lying beneath the home of those who betrayed him. When the story hit the news, the world was stunned. These weren't delinquents. Not the kind of kids society expected to kill. They were honor students from wealthy families, kids with college dreams and bright futures. Reporters called it the honor roll murder. Teachers who had once praised them for their intelligence were now watching their mugshots on television. The courtroom was filled with silence as prosecutors described how methodically the boys had planned it. The lies, the digging, the calculations. It wasn't a spontaneous act of rage, it was a cold, deliberate execution. Parents across America looked at their own children differently after that, wondering what was really happening behind the polite smiles, the straight A's, and the teenage bravado. Because beneath that perfect surface, 5 brilliant minds had turned their intelligence into a weapon, and in doing so, proved that evil doesn't always come from failure or desperation. Sometimes, it comes from arrogance, from the belief that you can outsmart morality itself. It was a cold December night in Toronto, 2003. The kind of night when the streets fall quiet and the world feels smaller, tucked beneath the weight of winter. Inside a small suburban home, 12-year-old Jonathan Robert Madden was getting ready for bed. His biggest worries were the same as any kid's. School the next morning, a video game he wanted for Christmas, what movie to watch on the weekend. But somewhere else in that same house, his 16-year-old brother and a friend were whispering plans that would turn their home into a scene of unthinkable horror. Jonathan looked up to his brother. He trusted him. He admired him. But that night, the person he admired became the one to end his life. For weeks, the older brother and his friend had been talking about death. Not in the way kids talk about scary movies or ghost stories, but with fascination. They wanted to know what it would feel like to kill someone. No anger, no revenge, just pure curiosity. And the target they chose wasn't a stranger. It was Jonathan, the innocent boy sleeping just down the hall. When the attack began, it was silent at first. The two teens crept into his room with knives and scissors, their hands trembling not with fear, but with adrenaline. Jonathan woke up confused, asking what they were doing, but the answer came in violence. They lunged at him, stabbing again and again. 71 wounds. His face, his throat, his chest, each cut made not in rage, but in experimentation. He screamed, fought, begged, but there was no mercy. By the time it was over, the walls were painted with the unthinkable. The killers stood over his body, breathing heavily, their hands slick with blood. One of them laughed. The other stared frozen, studying the body like it was some kind of twisted science project. They didn't run. They didn't hide. They just watched. Minutes later, one of them turned to the other and said, "Now I know what it feels like, Kasa." When police arrived, what they found didn't look like a crime of passion. It looked like ritualized brutality. The medical examiner later described the scene as one of the most disturbing in Canadian history. There were no signs of provocation, no fight, no motive beyond curiosity and darkness. The older brother confessed without emotion, as if he were describing a routine chore. The words that left his mouth chilled the courtroom. "I wanted to see what it felt like to kill someone close to me." The news spread quickly. People refused to believe it at first. A brother killing his own sibling, and for what? Not money, not hatred, just for the experience. Classmates described the older brother as quiet but smart, not the type to hurt anyone. Teachers said he'd seemed normal. But behind that calm exterior was something else entirely. A fascination with pain, death, and the power of taking life. During the trial, psychiatrists tried to explain it. Some called it psychopathy, others said it was a manifestation of untreated mental illness. But no label could make sense of it. Parents across Canada were horrified, struggling to imagine how a child could develop such emptiness. The family's grief was beyond words. They had lost one son to murder and another to his own monstrous act. In that quiet neighborhood, where children once played hockey in the driveways and neighbors shared warm greetings, silence settled like frost. The house where it happened was left empty for years, a ghost of what it used to be. A reminder that sometimes evil doesn't come from outside. Sometimes it's born in the very same rooms where innocence once lived. It was October 2002 in Newark, California, a quiet suburban town where nothing extraordinary ever seemed to happen. 17-year-old Gwen Amber Rose Araujo lived there, a bright, kind, and spirited teenager trying to navigate a world that wasn't built to understand her. Born Edward Araujo Jr., Gwen had spent her teenage years discovering her identity, finding the courage to live as her true self. A young transgender woman. To her friends, she was confident and funny, the kind of girl who made every room a little lighter. But behind the laughter, there was a storm of judgment always waiting on the edge of acceptance. Gwen met a group of boys at a party months before. Michael Magidson, Jaron Neighbors, Jason Cazares, and Jose Merrill. They liked her energy, her charm, the way she carried herself with confidence. Gwen began hanging out with them, flirting, joking, feeling for once that she belonged. But their curiosity about her became darker, mixed with whispers and suspicion. They didn't understand her. And in their immaturity and ignorance, confusion turned into obsession. On the night of October 3rd, Gwen went to a small house party with them. The air was heavy with alcohol, smoke, and that reckless teenage invincibility that makes danger feel distant. But as the night stretched on, the tension grew. The boys confronted her. They demanded to know the truth. What followed wasn't a conversation. It was an interrogation. Gwen tried to laugh it off, but their tone had changed. It wasn't playful anymore. It was cruel. One of them grabbed her. Another shouted. They forced her into a room, shouting insults, their voices growing louder, uglier. When they realized she was transgender, the room erupted into chaos. Their rage was immediate and merciless. The same boys who'd laughed with her now turned into monsters. They beat her, punched her, kicked her, pulling her hair, shouting slurs that cut deeper than the blows. For hours, the violence continued, fueled by hatred and fear. She begged them to stop. They didn't. At some point, someone grabbed a frying pan and struck her over the head. The sound of impact silenced the room. Gwen fell to the floor, bruised, broken, her life slipping away in front of them. When the reality of what they'd done sank in, panic set in. They wrapped her body in a blanket, carried her into a truck, and drove out to the Sierra Nevada foothills. The desert was still and empty. Under the cover of night, they dug a shallow grave and buried her there, the ground swallowing a girl who had only ever wanted to be herself. Days passed before her mother, Sylvia Guerrero, reported her missing. She knew instantly that something was wrong. Gwen always called, always came home. Police began searching, interviewing friends, following the trail of lies. But it was one of the killers, Jaron Neighbors, who eventually cracked. He told investigators everything: how they had killed her, where they had buried her, and why. When police found her body, all that remained was evidence of brutality, the final mark of hate carved into her memory. The trial that followed became one of the most publicized transgender hate crime cases in American history. The defense tried to argue a trans panic excuse, claiming the boys had acted out of shock and humiliation. But there's no justification for what they did. No panic that can explain such cruelty. Gwen's mother sat in that courtroom, staring at the faces of the teenagers who had taken her daughter's life, demanding justice not just for Gwen, but for every young person who has been punished simply for existing. When the verdict came, the weight of it was more than legal. It was cultural. It was human. Gwen's murder forced America to look directly at its prejudice, to see the cost of ignorance, the danger of mockery, and the deadly consequences of turning identity into a weapon. It was a chilly October evening in 2009 in the small, quiet town of St. Martins, Missouri. 13-year-old Elizabeth Olten was walking home from a friend's house, just a few minutes away, humming to herself, her pink cell phone glowing in her hand. She was kind, shy, and loved by her family, the kind of girl who believed the world was good. But somewhere between her friend's front porch and her own doorstep, she vanished into the dark. The person waiting for her wasn't a stranger. It was a 15-year-old girl who lived down the street, Alyssa Bustamante. Alyssa looked like a normal teenager on the surface. Blue eyes, braces, a wide, sometimes mischievous smile. But behind that smile was something cold. She had grown up with a broken family, a mother addicted to drugs, and a father in prison. Her grandmother had taken her in, hoping to give her some stability. But inside Alyssa's mind, chaos brewed, a fascination with death, self-harm, and control. On her social media pages, she called herself psychotic. She posted photos of herself with cuts on her arms and wrote about her dark thoughts. To her classmates, she seemed odd but harmless. No one knew what she was planning. Days before Elizabeth's disappearance, Alyssa had gone into the woods behind her house and dug 2 graves. Shallow, narrow holes in the dirt. When questioned later, she said she didn't know why. She just wanted to. On October 21st, she saw Elizabeth walking home and felt an impulse. An urge she'd been waiting to satisfy. She lured the little girl into the trees, telling her she wanted to show her something. The woods were silent, just the crunch of leaves beneath their feet. Then Alyssa struck. She strangled Elizabeth with her bare hands until the girl stopped moving. But it wasn't enough. She pulled out a knife and slit her throat. Then, With eerie calmness, she dragged the body into one of the pre-dug graves, covered it with leaves and dirt, and walked home like nothing had happened. Later, she wrote in her diary, her handwriting calm, detached, almost cheerful. She described the murder in detail, ending her entry with the words, "Marf, it was amazing. As soon as you get over the 'oh my God, I can't do this' feeling, it's pretty enjoyable." When Elizabeth's mother reported her missing, the search began immediately. The entire town joined in. Police, volunteers, neighbors, everyone combing through the woods, calling her name. And all that time, Alyssa stayed silent, pretending to care, joining in on the concern. But investigators soon noticed her strange behavior. She was emotionless, even smirking. When police questioned her, she cracked under pressure, finally leading them to the grave. The confession that followed stunned the world. A teenager, not even old enough to drive, had committed one of the most chilling murders in Missouri's history. During her trial, the courtroom was silent as prosecutors read her diary aloud. Her grandmother wept, unable to comprehend how the child she'd raised had become capable of such evil. Psychologists described Alyssa as manipulative, intelligent, and disturbingly calm. A girl who wanted to feel power and found it through taking life. The murder of Elizabeth Olten shattered the illusion of innocence in youth. It forced parents everywhere to confront a terrifying question. What happens when curiosity turns to cruelty, when pain becomes pleasure, and when a child decides to play God? It was a warm August afternoon in 1993 in the quiet town of Savannah, New York. A place so peaceful that crime was almost unheard of. The kind of town where people left their doors unlocked and children rode their bikes without fear. That day, 4-year-old Derek Roby was one of those children. He told his mother he wanted to walk to a summer recreation program just down the street. It was only a few blocks away. His mother hesitated, then smiled, believing nothing bad could happen in a town like Savannah. Derek left home with a smile, a lunch bag in hand, and never came back. Minutes later, another child spotted him, 13-year-old Eric Smith. With his fiery red hair, thick glasses, and freckles, Eric didn't look like a threat to anyone. He was a quiet, awkward boy, often bullied at school, called names, pushed around, and ignored. Inside him, years of anger had been building. Resentment, humiliation, and a growing fascination with violence. When he saw Derek walking alone, something inside him snapped. Eric called out to Derek, offering to show him a shortcut through a wooded path. The younger boy trusted him instantly. He was just a kid, and Eric looked like a friend. Together, they disappeared into the trees. What happened next was a burst of rage that no one saw coming. Once they were deep in the woods, Eric attacked. He threw Derek to the ground, punching and strangling him, his hands trembling with adrenaline. Then, in a fit of uncontrolled fury, he picked up a large rock and brought it down on the little boy's head again and again. When Derek stopped moving, Eric didn't stop. He violated the body with sticks, rocks and dirt, not out of revenge, but pure, uncontrollable hatred. When he walked out of the woods, his heart was pounding. He felt powerful. For the first time in his life, he wasn't the one being hurt. He was the one in control. He went home, washed his hands, and joined his family for lunch as if nothing had happened. Hours later, when Derek didn't show up at the recreation center, panic spread through the town. Search teams combed the area until a volunteer stumbled upon the small, lifeless body lying in the dirt. The scene was brutal, unlike anything police had ever seen in their quiet community. For days, investigators searched for the killer. They believed it had to be an adult. No child could do something so vicious. But when Eric showed up at the police station days later, unprompted, and asked strange questions about the murder, detectives began to take notice. His calm demeanor, his eerie curiosity, it didn't fit the image of an innocent kid. When they brought him in for questioning, the truth came out. Eric broke down and confessed, his voice trembling as he said the words, "I killed him." The town was shattered. Parents wept openly in the streets. Reporters called it the day Innocence died. No one could comprehend how a boy so young, so small, could harbor such darkness. Psychologists examined him, searching for an explanation. Was it mental illness, trauma, or something far deeper? Eric admitted that he didn't even know why he did it. Only that he was angry at the world, and Derek was the one who had to pay for it. In court, Eric sat small and expressionless as the details of the murder were read aloud. He was tried as an adult and sentenced to prison, a child entering a world of steel bars and locked doors. Years later, during parole hearings, he said he was sorry that he'd changed. But for many, forgiveness was impossible, because in that quiet New York town, where laughter once echoed through the streets, the memory of a small boy's final steps and a red-haired teen's unthinkable rage still lingers like a ghost. It was November 1998 in Jacksonville, Florida, a warm, ordinary afternoon in a peaceful neighborhood. 8-year-old Maddie Clifton was outside playing, her laughter echoing down the street as the sun began to dip behind the trees. She was full of life, always smiling. The kind of kid who made friends wherever she went. When her mother called her in for dinner, and she didn't answer, it was strange at first, then terrifying. The entire neighborhood joined in the search. Police, neighbors, volunteers. They combed every backyard, every shed, every inch of the woods. But Maddie had vanished without a trace. Just across the street lived 14-year-old Joshua Phillips. To everyone, he seemed like a normal teenager. Shy, polite, a good student. He played baseball, kept to himself, and lived with his strict father and caring mother. No one had any reason to suspect him. For a week, search parties walked right past his house, unaware that the missing girl was only a few feet away, hidden where no one could imagine, under his own bed. The truth came out not through police work, but by accident. Joshua's mother was cleaning his room when she noticed something strange. A wet spot near his bed frame that looked like it had come from a leaking water bottle. She bent down to check and caught a faint smell, something she couldn't identify but couldn't ignore. When she lifted the mattress, her scream tore through the house. Beneath it lay the decomposing body of 8-year-old Maddie Clifton, wrapped in sheets, hidden in the dark. When Joshua was brought in by police, his face was pale, shaking. He claimed it had been an accident, that Maddie had come over to play, that they were hitting baseballs in his room, and that one of the balls struck her in the eye. Panicking, he said he feared his father's reaction and tried to hide what happened. But the evidence told a different story. Maddie had been beaten, stabbed multiple times and strangled. Her injuries showed signs of deliberate violence, not an accident. The story Joshua told didn't add up. Investigators soon learned that fear alone didn't explain what happened. What they found instead was a chilling glimpse into the darker corners of a teenage mind. There was no rage, no clear motive, just a spontaneous act that spiraled into horror. For 7 days, Joshua slept in that room, ate his meals, watched TV, all while the body of his 8-year-old neighbor lay hidden inches below him. The image was haunting, almost unreal. During his trial, the courtroom fell silent as the details emerged. His mother broke down, struggling to understand how her quiet, seemingly gentle son could have done something so monstrous. Joshua himself showed no outbursts, no visible emotion, just a strange emptiness, like he hadn't yet grasped the magnitude of what he'd done. Psychologists described him as emotionally immature, detached, and deeply afraid of his father, a boy who had learned to hide fear until it consumed him completely. When the verdict was read, the air felt heavy. Joshua Phillips, only 14, was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. His small frame looked lost among the courtroom's cold walls. For the Clifton family, there were no answers, only pain. For the Phillips family, there was disbelief. Two families destroyed by one moment of madness. Years later, as Joshua grew into adulthood behind bars, he began speaking about his crime, calling it a panic reaction, saying he had been terrified, not evil. But for those who remember the search, the heartbreak, and the horror discovered beneath that bed, the question lingers: how could innocence twist so suddenly into something unthinkable?